The 80s. Ah, what a great time it was. A time of bliss, a time of innocence, truly a time of joy. But why? Why do people miss the 80s so damn much? Why specifically the 80s? Like, what was so important about the 80s that makes people miss it? Especially compared to nowadays. Well, let's look at the 80s themselves first. What were the 80s? The 80s were a time of discovery, a time of peace, a time of innovation. The 80s marked the end of the Cold War. As yes, while tensions were starting to get a little high during the early 80s, after Mikhail Gorbachev was elected in 1985, tensions between America and the Soviet Union started to ease, and the world started to come together. Later speaking, the Berlin Wall would collapse, and the Cold War would end, with the Soviet Union dissolving. So clearly it was a time of peace and prosperity. Now, yes, there were economic recessions happening, but for the most part, a lot of big inventions happened. Big inventions in the 80s include the disposable camera, DNA fingerprinting, compact discs, the internet, probably the most important one. PCs were also kind of invented in the 80s, personal computers. A lot of space stuff was developed during the 80s, including the space shuttle itself. Windows, and even Chicken McNuggets were all invented in the 80s. Out of all of these inventions, like I previously mentioned, the biggest one is probably the internet. Now, what's interesting about the internet back then in the 80s and the 90s was how different it was compared to nowadays. Nowadays, the internet is a chaotic place with a lot of polarization and violence. But back then, it was a time of peace, a time where you could social network with people who shared similar interests. I recommend you check out my video on internet nostalgia as it goes deeper into this. But it just wasn't on the internet that things were more chill and relaxed. Even people in real life were also more relaxed. Back then, the world was a simpler place. And back then, there wasn't stuff like the internet, or calls, or parties, or anything, so people had to talk to themselves in real life and experience things together in real life, and get to know themselves better in real life. Now, obviously that's not a bad thing that we have, calls and parties and all that. That's actually a good thing, because then you can talk and chill with your homies, whenever you feel like, and you don't have to create some crazy sort of plans and everything. But it might have made people less friendlier and less social. It seems like people nowadays almost fantasize with the idea of the 80s as a sort of way to take a break from social media and modernity, as a sort of way to go back in time and relive certain eras. Now, keep in mind that, a part of the reason that we might see the past as better than today is because the past is the past. It is fixed in time. The stuff that happened in the past that was bad happened in the past. We are not there to experience the bad things of the past, but we are here to experience the bad things of the now. The stuff that's happening in the world that's horrible right now, which might create a sort of bias that the past was better than the present, when the past had its own kind of issues. Now, that being said, it's actually not too far off that the past was better than the present, because to some extent, in a way, it was. History is like a cycle. It repeats itself once in a while, and it seems like recently people have become more and more polarized politically. It seems like people are starting to hate each other more and more, whereas back in the 80s, none of this political polarization was as present as it is now. Not saying there wasn't some, but it seems like things have gotten worse. Back then, media and culture was also more lighthearted. It was more cheery. And nowadays, media seems to have taken a darker turn. It's sadder, it's angrier, it's darker. AKA, life was always difficult, but things have gone to shit recently. Oh, another good thing about the 80s was the increase in tourism that happened during it. But probably the final point that I can honestly bring to the table of why the 80s is so hailed nowadays is if you look at all the generations that have existed, a big chunk of them would view the 80s as nostalgic because they have either experienced the 80s themselves or because they have heard things from their parents about the 80s. So yes, whether it be that the 80s were a time of technology and innovation, or whether it be that the 80s were more peaceful and more quiet, or whether it just be that newer generations have heard stories of the 80s or have experienced the 80s themselves and their nostalgia. The 80s were truly a time of wonder and mystery. Truly a time period we will never experience again. Future generations will probably view this decade in a similar way. So at the end of the day, the moral is this: the past is the past, and the future is ahead of you. Enjoy the present moment. Don't let anxiety get the best of you.